All right, so next up, we've talked a little bit about the menus and how we have our restaurant organized and some of the management tools that we're looking at. Well, one of the big ones as we jump into this next section is going to be our recipes. So we're going to need standardized recipes so that we can know exact amounts of ingredients that go into each entree, into each appetizer, into each of the menu items. Each one of our menu items needs its own specific standardized recipe, so we know how much goes into each one. So when we forecast the amount that we're going to sell, we can actually go through and know how much product to order for each one. We can take our standardized recipe. We know what products we're putting into it. We know exactly the amount of each product that goes into it, and so we can determine what the total cost of the recipe is, and then portion costs and all of those things. So we start out with our menus, our standardized recipes. Our standardized recipes are recipes where we know the exact quality and quantity of each item. We know, how to prepare the items, so we know exactly how to cut the onions. We know exactly how to, we know to julienne the onions. We know to dice the onions. We know whether we are serving an 8-ounce steak or a 12-ounce steak, or whether we are dicing a steak or, dicing beef, whether we're, there's, many different preparation methods, but we want to make sure that those are specifically laid out for whoever is making this recipe, so that they can produce it in the same quality and same quantity each time that this is produced. So it's going to give us the type and amount of each ingredient. It's going to give us the preparation and cooking procedures. It's going to tell us the yields, portion sizes, all of those things. And so as we develop our menu, we also need to be developing standardized recipes for each of those menu items. So if we look at an example here of a standardized recipe, so this is our Philly cheesesteak recipe. It yields 12. The portion size is 1 each, so it yields 12 sandwiches. We're cooking it on a flat top grill. The cooking temperature is 375 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to take 5 minutes to cook. The tool that we're using to portion it is a count. So 1 sandwich per serving. Cooking technique is we're grilling it. HACCP. So HACCP, for those that don't know, is Hazard Analysis of Critical Control Points. Essentially what that means is there anything we need to do to keep this food safe? Well, yes, we need to keep the meat frozen until the time we actually use it. We need to store our cheese at 41 degrees or less. Hazardous foods, steak and cheese, tells us that we need 12 each of our hoagie rolls, 12 ounces of Worcestershire sauce, 3 cups of green peppers julienne, 3 cups of yellow onions julienne. And the julienne, for those that don't know, is a specific culinary term for the size of the cut peppers and onions. So it's sometimes you'll hear it referred to as matchstick, a matchstick cut. It's essentially a julienne. So 3 cups of those, 3 cups of those, 24 slices of pepper jack cheese, and 12 4-ounce breakaway steaks. I'll show you a couple more standardized recipes over the next couple of days. Then down here we see the method of preparation. It tells us exactly how to cook it. As for your rec and costing form assignment, this will be one of the 2 recipes that you actually requisition the products for and cost out in the week. So this is an example of a recipe that you would see in an operation. So each of the recipes is going to be customized for the restaurant. If we're a Chili's or an Applebee's, then we're going to have that same standardized recipe in each one of our operations. Occasionally, we might need to test them, adjust them for different operations. Some of that would be if you have a restaurant in Denver, you're at a high altitude, and so if we're baking something or whatever, then we may need to adjust our recipe a little bit to make or cooking times and temperatures might need to change a little bit just for the change in altitude. It's definitely a tool for management. I can look at this recipe, and as we get a little bit further on in the week, I will start showing you some product guides. But I know that I need 12 hoagie rolls, and so I go to my product order guide, and I find my box of hoagie rolls, and it has 36 of them in there, and it costs a certain amount. I know exactly how much each one of these hoagie rolls costs. I buy Worcestershire sauce by the gallon. I know that a gallon costs $5.48, and so I know exactly how much each ounce of Worcestershire. I can figure out exactly how much each ounce of Worcestershire sauce costs, and so I need 12 ounces. I know exactly how many dollars of, really it's pennies, but I know exactly how many pennies of Worcestershire sauce I'm putting in. Green peppers and onions, I know I need 3 cups. I don't buy those in cups, I buy them in pounds, and so we have a little conversion that we're going to have to do, which we're going to touch on in the next Tegrity session, the next batch of notes. But I know that I need 3 cups. I can figure out how much that actually weighs, and I can figure out how many green peppers I need by weight to put into this recipe. Same for the onions. I know how many pounds of onions I need to put in here, and so that will tell me exactly how much the green peppers cost. I can figure out how much the onions cost. I can figure out exactly how much 24 slices of pepper jack cheese costs, exactly how much 12 of the 4-ounce breakaway steak costs. So I can total up how much it costs me to make this recipe, which yields 12 sandwiches. So if it costs me $36 to make 12 sandwiches, I divide the 36 by the 12 sandwiches, and it'd tell me that it cost me $3 per sandwich to make. And that's not the right answer for when you have to do this on your assignment. That is not the right answer. Just keep that in mind. It's not $3 per sandwich. So, but that's essentially how we're going to use this for a tool. Not only are we going to use it as a tool for our employees so that they can make these sandwiches the exact same every single time, but we're going to use it from the management side so that we know exactly the amount of dollars that we're putting into each one, so we can make sure that we're monitoring that and monitoring waste for the green peppers and onions, but then ultimately making sure that we're charging enough for our menu to recoup our costs from that, and then also provide us enough contribution margin to pay the rest of our expenses. So it's a great tool for management. Should be complete, consistent, and should be simple to follow. The language that we use should match the language that our employees understand. So if we're using terms like julienne onions and julienne green peppers, our culinary staff or our back-of-house staff should be able to know what those terms mean. If they don't, well, we need to incorporate that into training. We need to make sure that we have accurate measurements. We do measurements in a couple different ways, by weight and by volume, but we want to make sure that they're accurate. That it provides consistency. It helps us with portion control. If we're not accurate, if our employees aren't following the recipe, specifically putting the exact amount of weight, they're guessing, or they're measuring the salt in the palm of their hand instead of measuring it in a tablespoon, like our thing says, then we can, maybe lack a little bit of consistency. Salt's not a very expensive thing, but over a few years, if you're wasting a little bit of salt here and a little bit of salt there, that adds up to some dollars. So it all kind of comes back to the portion control. That really comes to when we're plating the items. So if we have mashed potatoes, and somebody's just using a big spoon to put the mashed potatoes on the plate instead of the number 8 scoop or the 4-ounce spoodle, then we're not specifically controlling portions. Because if I have a big spoon and I'm putting mashed potatoes on my plate, I'm going to mound it up huge. If somebody else might use that spoon and they might not put as much. So a customer comes in one day and they have a big pile of mashed potatoes. They come back a couple days later and they just have a little bit of mashed potatoes. Well, we're inconsistent. And so your customer is going to see that. They're going to be like, man, I was expecting, they brought their friend in because they got the chicken fried steak the other day and it had this huge mound of mashed potatoes and the white gravy and stuff on it. And today got a little mound of mashed potatoes and the chicken wasn't as big or whatever. And so it was inconsistent. Pisses our guests off because they're expecting the same thing. So, yeah. Back to our recipes. So we measure our ingredients in a couple of different ways. We do it by weight or we do it by volume. Weight, when we're talking about weight, hopefully everyone has dealt with weight at some point. It's the mass of a substance, essentially. We have gravity that makes it weigh a certain thing, whatever, but grams, ounces, pounds. We're in the States, and so we generally use ounces and pounds. The metric system, we would use grams and kilograms. So if you travel to Europe, to Australia, Zealand, any of those places over there, then you're going to be measuring your stuff in grams and kilograms and not ounces and pounds. Here we do ounces and pounds. It is by weight is the most accurate method. So if we're doing things by weight, it's going to be the most accurate. If we do things by volume, it's quicker. It's quicker to do things by volume because I can, instead of having a scale and putting a bowl on it and tearing it back out to 0 and then putting in the flour to get up to 12 ounces or whatever, it's quicker to just grab a cup and grab a cup and a half and boom. Or actually 12 ounces would be about 2.5 cups, depending. Which this is where volume is a little less accurate. Your cup of flour might not weigh what my cup of flour does, because if you dip your cup in and you maybe level it off, or you dip your cup in, you pack it down, you dip it in, you pack it down. Well, if you pack the flour in there, then it's going to weigh more, and you're going to have more flour in it than if somebody that sifts their flour in or whatever. It's going to have more air in there, and so it's going to weigh a little bit less. A cup of sifted flour is going to weigh like 4.5 ounces, whereas a cup of packed flour is going to weigh like 6.5 ounces. So you've actually, you have a cup of flour both ways, but the one that's packed in has more flour in it. So it's a little less accurate. We're spending a little bit more on flour. That's not the biggest key, is that our recipe might not turn out the same. So our Philly cheesesteak, this one's a pretty simple one. The other one you'll have to do for your, it's going to have some things in weight, and I'm still going to put some stuff in cups because there's a hidden reason for that. Normally I would have this in weights for any standardized recipe that I would give to my employees, but I need you to, in your assignment, take this a step further because you're going to actually have to convert this to a weight. So that's why I left them in cups. But here we know that, our steaks are in 4-ounce portions. We're going to use 12 of them. If you really measure out 3 cups of julienne green peppers, we're going to have some discrepancies. And if you do it 5 different times, each one's going to weigh a little bit different because julienne green peppers don't really fit in a cup all that well. But for the nature of this assignment, we do it so that you can convert things to a weight. Some common equivalents, a dash. You're probably really not going to see that in a restaurant setting, but if you're converting, let's say you're opening a country cafe and your grandma has the best chicken and dumplings in the world, and so you want to have that on your menu, and her recipe calls for a dash of something, well then you would go ahead and convert that to 1/8 of a teaspoon, and then obviously you wouldn't want to make 6 portions of chicken and dumplings for your restaurant. You're going to make 60 portions or whatever, and so you would convert that. We're not really going to do so much on that sort of conversion. For those that have had HRM 1995, you will have done, you will have converted recipes to take it from 4 portions to 20 portions. I'm not really gonna have you do that in here. It's not really what we're doing in here. We're more looking at the costing side of things. But there are some equivalents listed here in case you're unfamiliar with them. I may ask you a couple of these on a test just to give you some easy points because, it's pretty basic stuff. Just know that, like, when we're looking at tablespoons here, 2 tablespoons equals 1 fluid ounce. Tablespoons, teaspoons, cups, pints, gallons, all of those things are volume measurements. The only one here that's weight is this pound. 1 pound is 16 ounces. Everything else is volume. So don't confuse yourself and think that 2 tablespoons weighs 1 ounce. It does not weigh 1 ounce. It's 1 ounce of volume. So a gallon is 128 fluid ounces. So a gallon of milk, yes, it's 128 fluid ounces, but its weight is not necessarily 128 ounces. It's going to weigh a little bit less, actually, than that, because the fat weighs less than the water. Whatever. But just know that this does not mean, so 2 tablespoons, if we have 2 tablespoons of garlic powder, that doesn't mean that we have 1 ounce of garlic powder by weight. It means that we have 1 ounce by volume. Hopefully this isn't getting too confusing. If it's any of these things, teaspoons, tablespoons, cups, pints, quarts, gallons, volume. The only time that we're in pounds and ounces, that's when it's in weight, and that's where you're going to be the most accurate. Some other things that can cause us some problems when we're doing recipes is make sure we have the right equipment to be able to do it. So if you're trying to take your grandma's chicken and dumpling recipe and she does it in a cast iron skillet, well, you're probably not going to be doing that in a cast iron skillet or even a cast iron saucepan. Or a cast iron stewing pot. You're probably not going to be doing that in your restaurant. You're probably going to have to change it to something else. Evaporation. So if we're taking a little batch of something and we're doing it in a big batch, there's going to be more liquid there that we're going to have to evaporate. Or if we're doing it in a small deep pan and now we're doing it in a thin shallow pan, the evaporation is going to be different. So that's why we, and recipe errors, time, language, that's the whole reason that we do a standardized recipe. So we try it. If it doesn't work, we fix it. We try it again. We get it to the point where it's perfect, and we do it 3 more times, and we get the same result those next 3 times. Well, now we have a standardized recipe. We use these to control our menu costs, or to control our food costs. We have a set menu, which we create standardized recipes for each of the products. In those standardized recipes, we identify the exact products that we want to order. So we find a vendor that will get them for us at the right price. It's not always the cheapest price, but the right quality at the right price. We receive them, we store them properly. We keep, if we're buying in frozen stuff, and if we're buying in frozen proteins and they need to thaw for a certain amount of time, we make sure that we have a schedule for freezer pulls and all of that stuff. If we're buying everything in fresh, then we really have to stay on top of inventory and order multiple times per week and some of those things. The big way is through our kitchen procedures. So portion control. Our standardized recipes give us specific portions. It tells us exactly how much is in each portion, so we know exactly how much to put on each customer's plate. We know exactly how much money we have tied up in that individual portion. So the reason that we do have portion control and standards is so that we know exactly how much money we have in there. We want to control waste, so we want to make sure that our employees that are processing our vegetables are skilled enough to do that, so they're not wasting a bunch of the green peppers or whatever. Green peppers, eggplants, all of those things are typically a little bit, they're somewhat high dollar. I guess it's high dollar, but red peppers, any of our specialty produce even, it's going to cost us some money, and so we want to make sure that whoever's fabricating it knows what they're doing so that we're not wasting that product. When we have scraps of products, we don't necessarily want to throw that in the trash. We can use those for other things. So our vegetable scraps, we can use those in making stocks and use the stocks to make sauces. We have beef trimmings, chicken trimmings, those kind of things. We can use those in other dishes. We can use them in soups. We can use them in to make appetizers or whatever. All right, so that's recipes. The next thing that we're going to get into is kind of what I talked about with these green peppers and onions. So when I get a green pepper or I get an onion, we'll say an onion. So I have an onion, and if I'd say I got one of those big yellow sweet Vidalia onions. So I go and I weigh this onion, and it weighs 12 ounces. Okay, this onion weighs 12 ounces. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to get 12 ounces of usable onion out of this product. So I have the onion, and it weighs 12 ounces, but I'm not going to eat the root. I'm not going to eat the skins, so I gotta cut the top off of it, and I gotta cut the root off of it, and I cut it in half, and I peel the skin off of it, and now I have my usable onion, and then I've got this other stuff that's kind of scrap. I mean, yes, I could probably take that and throw it in with the bones while I'm roasting the bones to make a chicken stock or whatever, or I can even potentially throw the skins and stuff in the water while I'm making the chicken stock. But for this Philly cheesesteak, I need julienne onions. So I'm not going to be able to use the skin, I'm not going to be able to use the root, and so there's some waste that's associated with that onion. Now, if I can use that in another dish, I'm not necessarily wasting it, but for the purpose of this recipe, it's considered waste. And so if I need 3 cups of julienne onions, I'm going to guess right off the top of my head, they're going to weigh about 4 ounces a cup, so let's make it a little different. Let's say 5 ounces per cup, so that means I need 15 ounces of julienne onions. Well, if all I order is 15 ounces of onion, once I peel the skin and stuff off, I'm not going to have enough for my recipe. I'm only going to have like 13 ounces of onion. So we have to convert that between what we call EP and AP. So when I buy an onion and it's fully intact, it's got the skin and the root and everything on there, then that's going to be AP. That's as purchased. I purchased this whole onion. Well, EP is edible portion. So what we need in this recipe is julienned onions. So that means it's not going to have a root, it's not going to have the skin, and so this is going to be an EP, and that's the edible portion. So that means it's the part that we can eat. So we're going to lose a little bit of that initial weight, so I would have to order 17.5 ounces of yellow onion to be able to get the 15 ounces that I need in my menu. So as we get into the next section, I'm going to really dive into that EP and AP before we actually go into requisitioning and costing out our recipe.